Lisa Wilson woke up early as usual. The morning light softly filtered through the white linen curtains that she had chosen herself 2 years ago in a small store in the city center. She liked the way they swayed slightly in the wind when the window was slightly open. It created a feeling of comfort, almost like in her childhood home. She stretched, feeling the slight coolness of the sheets, and looked at Steve sleeping next to her. His face, calm and relaxed in sleep, always brought a smile to her face. Even after 8 years of marriage, she still found his features just as attractive as the day they first met. Lisa was 34 and was born in the small town of Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Her childhood was spent among endless fields and old brick houses, where everyone knew each other by name. Her father, Thomas Brown, worked as a mechanic in a local workshop, and her mother, Ellen, was a school teacher. Lisa was their only child, and they poured all their love and care into her. She inherited from her mother a gentle character and the habit of seeing the best in people, and from her father's stubbornness and the ability to finish what she started. In Lancaster, she was still remembered as the girl with long braids who sold lemonade on the street corner every summer to earn money for new books. Steve was 37, and he was born in a completely different place in the noisy and dusty Phoenix, Arizona. His father, James Wilson, was an engineer at the local power station, and his mother, Mary, worked as a nurse in a hospital. Steve had two younger brothers, with whom he constantly fought as a child for the attention of his parents and a place in front of the TV. Phoenix hardened him. The hot sun, endless desert horizons, and the rigors of middle-class life taught him to appreciate what he had and always strive for more. He was tall, with broad shoulders and dark hair, which was now slightly touched with gray at the temples, which only added to his solidity. They met 9 years ago in Chicago, where Lisa moved after college to work in a small advertising firm, and Steve came on business for his then-young construction company. It was an accident. Lisa was sitting in a cafe with a friend, and Steve went there to drink coffee before meeting with a client. Their gazes met, and instead of leaving with a cup in his hands, he walked up to her table and asked if she would mind if he sat down. She didn't mind. Half an hour later, they were laughing at some nonsense, and a year later, they were married in a small chapel on the outskirts of Chicago, under the gaze of a dozen friends and relatives. They now lived in a suburb of Portland, Oregon, in a house on Greenwood Lane, a two-story building with white siding and a large garden that Lisa loved to tidy up. They bought the house 6 years ago when Steve landed a major contract to build an office building downtown, and Lisa decided to quit advertising and start freelancing so she could spend more time at home. They didn't have children, not yet, as Lisa told her friends with a slight smile, but their life seemed complete without it. They had each other, a cozy home, two cats, and a familiar rhythm of days that they both appreciated. Lisa got out of bed, trying not to wake Steve, and walked barefoot into the kitchen. Her morning ritual was the same: make coffee, turn on the radio on a low frequency with jazz, and look out the window at the garden. Today, she noticed that the roses near the fence began to wither. She will need to water them after breakfast. She loved these moments of silence when the house was still sleeping, and the world outside the window seemed so calm. Her hands moved as usual. She took out a coffee pot, poured the beans into the grinder, and inhaled their aroma. This was her little meditation before the day began. Steve woke up half an hour later, as always, with a slight groan and the usual "good morning, sunshine" that he has told her every day since they started living together. He came down to the kitchen wearing his old Arizona Wildcats t-shirt from his college days and hugged her from behind as she cut bread for toast. Lisa laughed and lightly pushed him away with her elbow. "You haven't shaved again," she said, feeling his stubble on her neck. "Soon you'll look like a lumberjack." "Lumberjacks are all the rage," he retorted, grinning as he reached for a mug of coffee. "Besides, you yourself said that slight stubble suits me." "I said it once, and now you use it all your life," she answered, rolling her eyes, but there was only tenderness in her voice. They sat down at the table as they had done hundreds of times. Avocado toast for her, bacon and eggs for him. The conversation was light and familiar about the weather, what needed to be bought in the store, about Steve's new project, which promised to bring good money. His company was growing, and he was proud of it. From a small business started in a garage in Phoenix, it grew into a firm with an office in Portland and contracts throughout the state. Lisa listened to him with a smile, resting her chin on her hand. She liked the way he talked about work, with a twinkle in his eye, with the same passion he had in his youth, when he told her about his dreams over a cup of coffee in that Chicago cafe. Lisa also did not sit idle. Her freelance projects, mostly logo design and website design for small companies, brought in a steady income, although not as much as Steve's. But she liked it. She could work from home, at her own pace, and not depend on office schedules. Sometimes she missed the days of running around to meetings in Chicago, wearing sharp suits and clutching a folder, but life in Portland was different, quieter, more her. They were married for 8 years, and their relationship had gone through a lot during that time. There were times when they quarreled over small things, like who forgot to take out the trash, or over serious ones, like the decision to move to Oregon, which Lisa had difficulty accepting at first. But they always found a way to make peace. Steve knew how to diffuse the situation with a joke, and Lisa knew how to hug him at the right moment. Their friends often joked that they were too perfect, and Lisa laughed in response, although she sometimes wondered, what if perfection is just a habit of hiding the cracks? This morning, there were no signs of change. Steve left for work, kissing her forehead as always. Lisa stayed at home, planning the day, watering the roses, finishing a logo for a client, cooking dinner. She turned on her laptop, opened her email, and started working while the cats lay lazily on the windowsill. The trees rustled outside the window, and somewhere in the distance a neighbor's dog barked. Everything was as it should be. At least that's what she thought. Lisa finished checking her email and leaned back in her chair. The screen glowed with a sketch of a logo for a local coffee shop, a minimalist silhouette of a cup with thin lines reminiscent of steam. She loved how simple shapes could tell a story, and she was already imagining what the sign would look like on a sign above the entrance. Work always helped her to distract herself and put her thoughts in order. She stood up to pour herself more coffee and glanced at the photo on the refrigerator. Her and Steve on the beach in Malibu 2 years ago. They were laughing, sunburnt, with wet hair from swimming. It was their first trip together since moving to Portland, and Lisa still considered it one of her best memories. Her thoughts went back to how they ended up here on Greenwood Lane. After their wedding, they lived in Chicago for 3 more years. Lisa then worked in an office overlooking Lake Michigan, and Steve traveled to construction sites, sometimes disappearing for the weekend to finish another project. Life in the big city was busy but tiring. Lisa loved Chicago, its noise, tall buildings, the smell of pizza from street eateries. But over time, she began to notice how Steve increasingly talked about wanting something different. "I need a place to breathe," he said one day, looking out the window of their 15th floor apartment. She didn't think much of it at the time, but a year later, he received an offer from a partner in Portland, and everything started to happen. The move was not easy for her. Lisa was accustomed to the rhythm of the metropolis, to friends whom she could meet at any moment, to the feeling of being in the center of the world. Portland was different, green, rainy, quiet. She missed Lancaster, but Chicago had become her second home, and leaving it hurt. Steve, on the other hand, blossomed here. He loved the forests outside the city, the ability to commute to work without traffic jams, the fresh air that reminded him of his childhood in Arizona, only without the scorching sun. Lisa saw him come to life, and this helped her come to terms with the changes. They found a house on Greenwood Lane, not new, but solid, with a spacious kitchen and the garden she had always dreamed of. Steve had insisted that they paint the walls themselves, and that weekend of fiddling with brushes and cans of paint, laughing at the stains on their clothes, had become a symbol of their new life for her. 6 years have passed since then. The house became their nest, as Lisa called it. She furnished it with love, a soft sofa in the living room, a wooden table that they bought at a flea market, shelves with books that she had collected since childhood. Steve added his own touches, an old trunk from Phoenix where he kept tools, and a collection of vinyl records that he listened to in the evenings while sitting with a glass of whiskey. They found a balance. She cared about comfort, He cared about making sure everything worked. When the water heater broke, Steve spent half the night working on it, refusing to call a repairman, and Lisa brought him coffee and sat next to him until he finished. "We're a team," he said then, wiping his hands on a rag, and she nodded, feeling warmth in her chest. Their marriage was built on such little things. Lisa didn't like loud words about love. She was content with the way Steve brought her a blanket when she was late at work, or how he called her from work just to ask how she was doing. He, in turn, appreciated her calmness, her ability to listen, her habit of leaving him notes on the refrigerator with reminders or just a smiley emoji. They were not a couple from romantic films, no sudden trips to Paris or bouquets worth 100 roses, but their life was real, warm, their own. Steve returned home at 6 in the evening, as usual. Lisa heard the garage door slam, and a minute later he appeared in the kitchen, throwing his briefcase on a chair. His shirt was slightly wrinkled and his face looked tired, but he still smiled at her when he saw her making his favorite shrimp pasta. "Was it a long day?" she asked, stirring the sauce on the stove. "Yeah," he sighed, sitting down at the table and rubbing his neck. "The new client wants us to meet deadlines that are physically impossible. It took half a day to convince him that miracles only happen in movies." Lisa chuckled as she poured him some water. "You are our master of persuasion. I remember how you talked me into going on that terrible fishing trip in Wisconsin." "Hey, it wasn't terrible fishing," he countered, laughing. "You just didn't appreciate the beauty of rain and mosquitoes." "And how we didn't catch anything," she added, placing the plate in front of him. "But you were so happy that I didn't complain." He took her hand and squeezed it lightly. "You always save me, Liz." Dinner passed in the usual silence, broken only by the sounds of forks and the purring of Marley, who rubbed himself against Steve's legs in the hope of a piece of shrimp. Afterwards, they sat on the sofa with glasses of wine red for her, white for him. Steve turned on the TV, but the sound was muted. They were talking more than watching. He talked about a new project, a residential complex on the outskirts of the city, which could become their largest in recent years. Lisa shared an idea for a coffee shop logo and asked his opinion on the colors. He didn't know much about design, but he always tried to give advice, and she appreciated that. When they went to bed, Lisa snuggled up to him, feeling the warmth of his body. She liked to fall asleep like this, knowing that he was nearby, that tomorrow there would be another day similar to this one, but with its own little joys. She didn't suspect that anything could change. Steve was her rock, her ideal husband, and she was his ideal wife. At least that's what she thought. The next day, Lisa woke up to the sound of rain. She loved the rains in Portland. They were gentle, not as harsh as in Chicago. Steve had already left for work, leaving her a note on the table. "Left early, love you. Don't forget your umbrella." She smiled, putting the paper away in the drawer where she kept all his messages. "Then I went into the garden, despite the weather, to check the roses. The ground was damp, and the smell of grass mixed with the scent of wet flowers." She ran her hand over the petals, thinking about how Steve had once given her seedlings for their anniversary. "So that you always have something beautiful," he said then. Returning to the house, she sat down to work, but her thoughts kept returning to him. She suddenly wanted to call him, just to hear his voice, but she decided not to distract him. He was probably busy. Instead, she opened an old album with photographs, their wedding, trips, first days in this house. In one photo, Steve was painting a fence, covered in white spots, and she was filming it, laughing. In another, they stood by a lake in Wisconsin, wet but happy. She flipped through the pages, feeling her heart fill with warmth. This was their story, their 8 years together, and she couldn't imagine anything ruining it. By evening, the rain had subsided, and Lisa decided to cook something special, lasagna, which Steve adored. She was chopping vegetables, humming to the radio, and did not notice how time flew by. When he returned, she greeted him with a smile, and he, as always, hugged her and said, "It smells like home." They ate dinner, laughing about some nonsense, and went to bed, not suspecting that their ideal life on Greenwood Lane would soon crack. The rainy day, when Lisa leafed through the album and prepared lasagna, remained in her memory as the last truly calm one. Little did she know then that the ideal life they had worked so hard to build would begin to fall apart at the seams, and not because of Steve, but because of herself. She didn't plan this. Lisa never considered herself a person capable of betrayal. She was someone who believed in honesty in promises made at the altar. But life, as it turned out, did not always fit into her ideas of correctness. It all started a couple of weeks later, at the end of March. Steve went on a business trip to Seattle. His company was discussing the details of a new project with investors, and he warned that he would return only in 3 days. Lisa was left alone, which did not happen very rarely. She was used to his absences. Work was an important part of his life, and she supported him, even if she sometimes missed him. She usually filled such days with work, walks in the garden, or reading. But that time everything was different. Life on Greenwood Lane, despite all its comfort, began to seem monotonous to her. Lisa couldn't say exactly when this feeling crept into her soul. Maybe when she realized that their evenings had become predictable: dinner, wine, TV, sleep. Maybe when Steve started talking about work more often than about themselves. Or when she caught herself thinking that she no longer remembers the last time she felt real excitement. She loved Steve, no doubt about it, but somewhere deep inside there was a growing feeling that she was stuck in this house, in this marriage, in this version of herself. That evening she decided to get out of the house. A friend, Kate, had long invited her to a party in downtown Portland, some bar where local designers and artists gathered. Lisa initially refused, citing fatigue, but then changed her mind. Why not? She said to herself, looking in the mirror and applying light makeup. She put on a simple black dress, which she had not taken out of her closet for a year, and called a taxi. She wanted to shake herself up, breathe in a different air, feel like not just Steve Wilson's wife, but someone else. The bar was loud, full of people, laughter, and the smell of cocktails. Kate met her at the entrance, hugged her, and immediately dragged her to the counter. "You need to relax, Liz," she said, ordering a margarita. Lisa smiled, although she felt a slight pang of guilt inside. Steve didn't like it when she drank without him. But he was in Seattle, and she was here, and at that moment it didn't seem that important. She didn't plan to get drunk. One cocktail led to a second, then a third, and soon she was laughing at the jokes of some guy with a beard who introduced himself as Mike. He was an artist, working on murals in the city center, and his way of speaking quickly, with sparkles in his eyes, for some reason caught her. Maybe it was the alcohol blurring the boundaries. Maybe I'm tired of the routine. Or just stupidity, as she would later tell herself. They talked about small things: the rain in Portland, how she hated the smell of paint, his latest job. And then, when Kate went to other friends, Mike leaned closer and said something quietly in her ear. Lisa didn't remember what exactly, but she remembered how her heart began to pound. Everything happened quickly and as if in a fog. They left the bar, supposedly to get some air, and half an hour later they found themselves at his place in a small apartment above the gallery, which smelled of oil paint and coffee. Lisa didn't think about Steve, didn't think about the house, about the cats, about the roses in the garden. She didn't think about anything at all. She just felt like adrenaline and alcohol were making her head spin. It was just one time, quick, awkward, devoid of any romance. When it was all over, she lay on his couch, looking at the ceiling, and suddenly realized that she wanted to go home. Mike fell asleep, and she quietly packed her things and left, calling a taxi right from his doorstep. The rain was pouring down in buckets, and she stood under the canopy, shivering with cold and shame. In the car, she looked out the window, trying to understand what she had just done. It wasn't like her. The Lisa who sold lemonade in Lancaster, who swore eternal fidelity to Steve, who built their ideal life, this Lisa could not do that. But she did. Returning home, she took a shower, standing for a long time under hot water, as if trying to wash away not only the smell of someone else's apartment, but also the very fact of what had happened. The cats greeted her at the door, purring, and she sat on the floor, petting them until tears began to sting her eyes. She wasn't going to tell Steve. It was a one-time mistake, a flash of stupidity. She convinced herself that she could forget, that it would remain her secret, hidden somewhere deep, like an old letter in a desk drawer. When Steve returned from Seattle, she greeted him with a smile, as always. He hugged her, smelling of road dust and coffee from a roadside cafe, and said that he missed her. Lisa nodded, feeling the lump in her throat getting heavier. She cooked dinner, listened to his stories about meetings, and laughed in the right places. Everything was the same as before, at least outwardly, but something changed inside. Every time he looked at her with his warm eyes, she felt a pang of guilt, sharp as a needle. A week has passed. Lisa tried to act as if nothing had happened. She worked on logos, watered roses, left notes for Steve on the refrigerator. Mike didn't text or call, she didn't even give him her number, which was for the best. It seemed to her that she could bury that evening, cover it with earth, like a withered flower, and move on. Steve didn't notice anything. He was busy with work, came home tired but happy, and their life flowed as usual. But at night, when he fell asleep next to him, Lisa lay with her eyes open, looking into the darkness. Her ideal marriage, her ideal husband, her ideal life, it all now seemed fragile, like glass. She thought it would remain a secret. She was wrong. Lisa sat at the kitchen table, absent-mindedly flipping through a gardening magazine. A light rain was falling outside the window, drops knocking on the glass, creating a soft background for her thoughts. Almost a week had passed since that night in Mike's apartment, and she had almost convinced herself that it was all over. She hasn't seen him since, hasn't heard from him, and even Kate, who was at the party, didn't suspect anything, or at least didn't ask. Lisa tried to be her old self. She cooked breakfast for Steve, smiled at him when he left for work, and even finished that logo for the coffee shop, putting more effort into it than usual. It seemed to her that if she behaved as if nothing had happened, then life would return to normal. Steve has been busier than usual these past few days. A housing project on the outskirts of Portland required his attention, and he often lingered in the office, returning home with tired eyes and a slight smile. Lisa noticed that he became a little quieter, a little more thoughtful, but she chalked it up to work. He was always like this. When he took on something big, he went into himself, thinking about the details. She didn't see anything unusual in this. It never occurred to her that he might know something. But Steve found out, and it wasn't because of some dramatic revelation, not because of a random call from Mike, not because of Kate's gossip, not because of a note found or a stain on her dress. No, everything was much simpler and more prosaic, as is often the case in life. It all started with Lisa's phone. That evening, when she returned from Mike's, she did not notice how her phone, which was in her bag, sent a message on its own. It was an accident. In a taxi, she took out her wallet to pay and apparently touched the screen. The message went into a chat with Kate, nothing incriminating, just a fragment of a phrase that she started to type, but did not send. "You won't believe that I just..." It stopped in the middle, but the time of dispatch, 3 o'clock in the morning, spoke for itself. Kate, seeing this the next day, decided to joke and wrote back, "What did you do at 3 in the morning, Liz? Secrets from Steve." Lisa, seeing the correspondence in the morning, felt cold, but quickly answered something incomprehensible. "I just couldn't sleep, ha." Kate didn't dig deeper. She wasn't the type to pry into other people's lives, and the topic died out. Lisa exhaled, deciding that the danger had passed. But she didn't know that Steve accidentally saw this chat. It happened 2 days ago, when he took her phone to check the weather forecast. His own was dead, and they were planning to go to the lake for the weekend. Lisa was in the shower, and he, without thinking anything bad, opened her messages. The chat with Kate was right on the screen, and those 2 lines, her snippet and Kate's joke, made him frown. He didn't scroll further, didn't rummage through her things or call Kate. Steve wasn't the type to make a scene or look for evidence at all. But he remembered, and he began to think. At first, he thought it was nonsense. Lisa could simply not sleep. She could write something about work or cats. But the time, 3 o'clock in the morning, did not give him peace. He knew her habits. She rarely went to bed later than midnight, especially when he was not at home. And this phrase from Kate, "Secrets from Steve," stuck in my head like a thorn. He didn't ask her right away. Steve wasn't the type to make accusations. Instead, he began to watch. The next day, he noticed that Lisa was looking at her phone a little longer than usual before putting it face down. Another day later, she was startled when he suddenly entered the kitchen while she was washing the dishes. These were little things, almost imperceptible, but Steve knew her too well. 8 years of marriage taught him to read her gestures, her silence, her smiles. And now he saw that something was wrong. He decided to check. Not because he wanted to incriminate her, but because he couldn't live with this question in his head. In the evening, when Lisa went into the bedroom with a book, he took her laptop. It was standing on the table in the living room, open, as usual. They never set passwords for each other, trusting them completely. Steve had no intention of digging through her letters or files. He simply opened her browser history to see what she had searched for in the last few days. And there, among requests for fertilizers for roses and lasagna recipes, he saw the line, "How to forget a mistake that no one knows about." The date was the same the morning after her nightly message to Kate. It wasn't a direct answer, but it was enough. Steve closed his laptop, sat down on the sofa, and stared into space for a long time. His heart beat steadily, but a heaviness grew in his chest. He wasn't angry, not yet. He just wanted to understand. And when Lisa went downstairs for water, he decided to ask. She walked into the kitchen, barefoot, wearing her old Chicago Marathon t-shirt, a souvenir from when they ran together. Steve sat at the table with his hands folded and looked at her. She smiled, but something in his gaze made her freeze. "Liz," he said quietly, almost casually, "we need to talk." She felt her legs become weak. She put the glass on the table and sat down opposite, trying to keep her face up. "About what?" she asked, although her voice trembled. He paused, looking at his hands, and then looked up. "How many times?" Lisa froze. Her thoughts swirled like leaves in the wind. She wanted to ask, "What do you mean?" to pretend that she didn't understand, but his gaze, calm, heavy, without a shadow of anger, deprived her of this opportunity. She suddenly felt that she was losing control of her life, as if the ground was disappearing from under her feet. "Steve," she began, but he interrupted. "Just tell me, how many times?" His voice was level, not accusing, but there was something frightening in that evenness. Lisa swallowed, trying to find the words. "One," she finally managed. "It happened once." He nodded as if he had expected this. His fingers clenched slightly, but he didn't make a fuss, didn't throw the glass, didn't hit the table with his fist. He just sat and looked at her. "When?" he asked after a pause. Lisa lowered her eyes. She wanted to disappear, to fall through the floor, but she knew she had to answer. "When you were in Seattle, last Friday." Steve nodded again. He leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms over his chest. "Who is he?" "It doesn't matter," she said quickly, too quickly. "There was no one. Just an accident." "An accident," he repeated, and for the first time the shadow of something flashed in his tone, not anger, but fatigue. "Did you accidentally leave with someone at 3 in the morning?" She shuddered. He knew about time. Where? Her brain was feverishly searching for an answer, and suddenly she remembered Kate's message. Crap. She looked up, meeting his gaze. "How did you know?" she asked, almost in a whisper. Steve chuckled slightly, but there was no joy in it. "You didn't close the chat with Kate. I took your phone to check the weather and saw this. And then," he paused, "then I looked at your laptop. You were looking for how to forget the mistake. It wasn't hard to put two and two together." Lisa covered her face with her hands. Her cheeks were burning, and her heart was pounding as if it wanted to burst out. "Steve, I didn't mean to. It was stupid. I drank, I didn't think." "You didn't think," he echoed, "and I thought that we always think about each other." These words hit harder than if he had shouted. Lisa raised her head, her eyes shining with tears. "I love you," she said. "It doesn't mean anything. It was a mistake." He was silent for a long time, looking somewhere past her. Then he stood up, went to the sink, and poured himself some water. His movements were slow, measured. "I love you too, Liz," he said finally, without turning around. "But now I don't know what to do with it." She stood up and walked towards him, but stopped when she saw how tense he was. "Steve, please. Say something. Shout if you want. Just don't be silent." He turned, put the glass on the table, and looked at her. "I won't shout," he said calmly. "I just want to understand why." Lisa opened her mouth, but the word stuck. "Why? Because she was bored, because you drank, because you're tired of their ideal, but so predictable life." She didn't know how to explain it. "I don't know," she admitted. "I don't understand myself." He nodded as if this was the answer he had been waiting for. Then he walked past her, took the jacket from the hanger, and opened the door. "Where are you going?" she asked, feeling panicked. "I'll take a walk," he replied. "I need to think." The door closed and Lisa was left alone. She sat down on the floor, hugging her knees, and cried quietly, soundlessly, like the rain outside the window. The door slammed, and the silence that followed was deafening. Lisa sat on the kitchen floor, hugging her knees, feeling tears running down her cheeks and dripping onto her old t-shirt. The rain outside the window intensified, knocking on the glass, as if nature decided to play along with her condition. The cats, Marley and Luna, approached her, purring, but she barely noticed them. Her world, so cozy and familiar just an hour ago, was collapsing, and she had only herself to blame. She didn't know how much time had passed. 5 minutes, half an hour, when I heard footsteps on the porch. The door opened again and Steve walked in, soaked to the skin. His dark hair stuck to his forehead, his jacket glistened with water, but his face remained calm, almost impassive. He took off his shoes, hung his jacket on the hanger, and walked into the kitchen, stopping at the door. Lisa raised her eyes to him, full of tears and fear. "Steve," she began, but her voice broke. She stood up, unsteadily, and stepped towards him. "Please don't go. I beg you." He looked at her, and in his gaze there was neither anger nor contempt, only fatigue and something else that she could not understand. He was silent, and this silence was killing her. "I know what I did," she continued, her words mixed with sobs. "It was a mistake, the stupidest mistake of my life. I didn't mean to hurt you. I love you, Steve, more than anything in this world. Please forgive me. I'll do anything to make sure you stay." She fell to her knees in front of him, grabbing his hand. Her fingers trembled, squeezing his wet sleeve. She felt pathetic, crushed, but pride didn't matter now. All she wanted was to hold him, to keep their lives from falling apart completely. Steve looked down at her for a long time. His face remained expressionless, but something tightened in his chest. He loved her despite the pain, despite the betrayal. This love did not go away. But the trust that had been the foundation of their 8 years together was gone, and he didn't know how to get it back. He went out into the rain to think, to give himself time to cool down, and there, walking along the wet streets of Greenwood Lane, he realized that he did not want to leave her. Not because he can't live without her, but because he's not ready to let go of everything they've built. But he also couldn't simply forgive and forget. "Stand up, Liz," he said finally, his voice low and even. She stood up, clinging to his hand like a drowning person to a life preserver. Her eyes were red, her face was wet with tears, but she did not look away. "I won't leave," he said, and her heart sank for a moment with relief. But he raised his hand to stop her when she tried to say something. "Wait, I'm not finished yet." Lisa froze, feeling hope mixed with anxiety. Steve walked over to the table, sat down with his hands folded in front of him, and nodded for her to sit down too. She obeyed. Her movements were mechanical, like a puppet. "You destroyed our family," he began, looking her straight in the eyes. "What was between us, the trust that I put in you, you broke it. And I don't know how to fix it. Steve, I swear." She began, but he stopped her with his gaze again. "Let me finish. I'm not going to leave you. I don't want a divorce. I don't want to pack my things and leave. But I also can't pretend that nothing happened. You made a choice that night, Liz. Now it's my turn to do my own thing." She swallowed. Her hands were cold despite the warm air in the room. His words sounded like a sentence, but there was a strange firmness in them that frightened and attracted at the same time. "I want you to prove that you are worthy of being with me." he continued. From this day on, everything will change. You will be my doll. You will do whatever I say, whatever I want. Do you agree? Lisa blinked, trying to comprehend his words. A doll? She had expected yelling, accusations, even conditions like family therapy, but this was something else. Her mind was spinning, but despair prevailed. She didn't want to lose him. I didn't want to be left alone in this house, with this guilt, with this shame. If he offered her a chance, any chance, she would jump at it. Yes, she whispered, her voice trembling. I agree. Steve nodded, as if this was a business arrangement and not a conversation between husband and wife. He stood up, walked over to her, and lightly touched her shoulder. Fine. Then let's start right now. Go wash yourself and change into something decent. I'm waiting for you in the living room. She looked at him, trying to see if he was serious, but his gaze was adamant. Lisa nodded and stood up, feeling lost. She went into the bathroom, turned on the water, and stood in front of the mirror for a long time, looking at her reflection. Her face was pale, her eyes were swollen, her hair was disheveled. She washed her face, wiped away her tears, and tried to clean herself up. Then she went into the bedroom, opened the closet, and chose a simple gray dress, what he had once called elegant. It seemed to her that this was important, although she did not understand what he was waiting for. When she came down to the living room, Steve was sitting on the couch with a glass of whiskey in his hand. The TV was turned off, and only the floor lamp was on in the room, casting a soft light on his face. He looked calm, but there was something new and powerful in this calmness. Sit down, he said, pointing to the chair opposite. Lisa sat down with her hands folded in her lap. Her heart was pounding, but she remained silent, waiting. From now on, you don't do anything without my permission, he began. You don't leave the house, don't call anyone, don't write until I tell you. You ask me what to cook, what to wear, where to go. Do you understand? She nodded, her throat tightening. Say it out loud, he demanded. Yes, I understand, she answered quietly. Fine. Tomorrow you will take the day off. No work. I want you to get the house in order. Fully, every corner, and so that dinner will be ready when I return. Something I like. You know what I love. Lasagna? She asked, her voice barely audible. Yes, lasagna, he confirmed. And one more thing. No more parties with Kate. No bars. If you need to meet someone, you ask me first. Clear. I see, she whispered. He took a sip of whiskey, looking at her over the glass. You wanted to prove that you are worthy. Here's your chance. But if you ever disobey Liz, I'll leave. And this time forever. She swallowed, feeling his words dig into her like thorns. This was not the Steve she knew, kind, attentive, with a soft smile. This was a different person, cold and unyielding. But she had brought him to this point, and now she had to live with the consequences. The next day, a new reality began. Lisa woke up early, before Steve, and quietly went down to the kitchen. She made coffee the way he liked it, strong, without sugar, and put the cup on the table. When he came down, she was standing at the stove, waiting. Good morning, he said, sitting down. What are you doing? I'm waiting for what you say, she answered, trying not to look him in the eyes. He smiled slightly for the first time since last night. Make me some scrambled eggs and toast, then start cleaning. She nodded and got down to business. Her movements were mechanical, but inside there was a storm raging. She hated herself for what she had done, she hated this situation, but most of all she was afraid that he would leave. She cooked, cleaned, washed the floors, cleaned the cabinets, whatever he ordered. By evening the house was sparkling, and lasagna was on the table, hot and fragrant. Steve returned from work, looked around the kitchen, and nodded. Not bad, he said. Sit down and eat with me. She sat down opposite, feeling like a guest in her own home. Lisa went to bed, but sleep did not come. She lay looking at the ceiling and thought about what their life had become. She was his doll, just like he said, and she agreed to this because she saw no other way out. Lisa lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling. The bed, which had previously seemed like a refuge to her, now felt alien, cold despite the warm blanket. Steve was sleeping next to him. His breathing was even calm, as if nothing had changed. But everything has changed. She felt it in every corner of the house, in her every movement, in his every word. She agreed to his terms because she was afraid of losing him. But now, in the stillness of the night, she began to realize that perhaps she had lost herself. The morning began the same as the previous one. Lisa woke up before Steve, went down to the kitchen, and made coffee black, without sugar, as he liked. She stood at the stove, waiting for him to come down, her hands nervously fiddling with the edge of the apron. When he walked in, wearing his old t-shirt and still sleepy-eyed, she tried to smile, but it came out forced. "Good morning," he said, sitting down at the table. His voice was smooth and businesslike. "What do we have for breakfast?" "I'm waiting for what you say," she answered quietly, like yesterday. He nodded as if this was a test she had passed. "Omelet with bacon and toast. With butter, not jam." Lisa turned to the stove, feeling her heart squeezing. She used to love cooking for him. It was part of their morning ritual, a small act of caring. But now it was not her desire, but his order. She grabbed eggs and bacon and started cooking, trying not to think about how strange it felt. When breakfast was ready, she placed the plate in front of him and stood still, waiting for his next instruction. "Sit down," he said, pointing to the chair opposite. "Eat with me." She helped herself to a small piece of omelet, but had no appetite. Her stomach clenched with tension. Steve ate in silence, occasionally glancing at her, as if checking to see if she would disturb something. After breakfast, he got up, finished his coffee, and said, "Today you will stay at home. No work. I want you to wash all the linen bed sheets, towels, my shirts, and pet them. Everything should be ready for my return." "Okay," she replied, her voice barely audible. "And one more thing," he added, putting on his jacket. "Your phone. Leave it on the table. I'll take it with me." Lisa froze, her fingers clenched into fists. "For what?" She blurted out before she could stop herself. Steve turned, his gaze growing colder. "I said that you don't call or write to anyone without my permission. It's easier if you don't have a phone. Come on, Liz." She felt her throat tighten, but she slowly took the phone out of her robe pocket and placed it on the table. Steve took it, put it in his pocket, and left without another word. The door closed, and Lisa was left alone in silence, broken only by the sound of rain outside the window. She stood in the middle of the kitchen, looking at the empty space where her phone lay. It was not just a gadget, it was her connection with the world, with Kate, with clients, with that part of life that belonged only to her. Now that too is gone. She took a deep breath, trying to calm herself, and went to the laundry room. Washing and ironing are simple tasks, but today they seemed like a punishment to her. She loaded the car, listening to the hum of the engine, and thought about how quickly Steve had begun to take away her freedom. The day passed slowly. Lisa washed, dried, ironed, her hands moved automatically, and her thoughts were spinning in chaos. She remembered their old life, how they laughed over little things, how he hugged her in the morning, how she could pick up the phone and text Kate just because she wanted to. Now all this was banned. She tried to convince herself that this was temporary, that he was just angry, that he would soon soften. But deep down she knew, this is not temporary. This is the new order. By evening the house smelled of cleanliness and iron. The bed linen lay in neat piles. Steve's shirts hung in the closet, ironed to perfection. Lisa prepared dinner, fried chicken and potatoes, his favorite dish, and set the plates on the table. When Steve returned, he looked around the kitchen, nodded, and sat down. "Okay," he said, "eat with me." She sat down opposite her again, forcing herself to swallow a few bites. After dinner, he took her phone out of his pocket and placed it in front of her. "You can take it," he said, "but only for work. I checked your messages. Kate doesn't write anymore, and don't write to her yourself, understand?" Lisa nodded, feeling her cheeks burn with humiliation. He rummaged through her correspondence. She didn't know what was worse, that he did it, or that she couldn't object. "Thank you," she managed, picking up the phone. "Don't thank me," he snapped. "This is not a gift. This is the rule." The next day, control became even stricter. Steve told her to make a list of everything she had to do for the day and show it to him before she left. He shot down her plan to call the client about the logo, saying, "That can wait. Clean out the basement instead." Lisa wanted to object. The basement was dusty, but she remained silent. She went down there with a rag and a broom, feeling like a prisoner in her own home. By the end of the week, she no longer recognized her life. Steve dictated everything: what she should wear, what she should cook, when she should go to bed. He took her credit card, saying he would give her cash as needed. "You shouldn't spend money without my knowledge," he explained, and Lisa simply nodded, too tired to argue. One evening, he told her to sit next to him on the sofa. She obeyed, her body tense with anticipation. He put on an old movie, a Western she never liked, and said, "Watch with me, and don't get distracted." She sat staring at the screen, but saw nothing. Her thoughts screamed, "This is not me. This is not my life." But she was silent, afraid to upset the fragile balance. "Steve," she finally decided when the movie ended, "how long will this last?" He turned to her, his gaze firm. "Until I decide that you have proven your loyalty. You chose this yourself, Liz. Do you remember?" She lowered her eyes, feeling tears burning her eyelids. "I remember," she whispered. "Then don't ask," he said and stood up. "Go to bed." Lisa went to bed, but sleep did not come again. She thought about how far his control went and how she herself had given him that power. She wanted freedom, but now it was not even in her own thoughts. Lisa lay in the dark, listening to Steve's breathing. His hand lay on her thigh, heavy, warm, but devoid of its former tenderness. She did not move, afraid to wake him, afraid to break the silence that had become her only refuge. A week has passed since the evening when she agreed to become his doll, and during those 7 days her life turned into something unrecognizable. She thought it would be temporary, that Steve would release his pain, his anger, and they would go back to the way they were before. But every day the control became tighter, like an invisible net, pulling her in more and more. The morning started the same way. Steve woke up first, and his voice, cold, commanding, came from the bedroom. "Liz, get up." She got up, pulled on her robe, and went down to the kitchen, where he was already waiting. He no longer said, "Good morning," did not hug her, did not smile. Instead, he held out his hand for her phone. "Show me," he said every time, and Lisa obediently opened messages, calls, even her browser history. He flipped through the screen, his fingers moving quickly, his eyes catching every line. If something came from a client, he would ask, "What is this? What are we talking about?" If she received a notification from Kate or another friend, he would frown and say, "Answer that you are busy, and don't write again." One day, Kate sent her a joke, a stupid picture of a cat, and Steve saw it and said, "Tell her you can't communicate until you earn trust." "Steve, it's just Kate," Lisa tried to object, her voice trembling. "She doesn't know anything." "I don't care," he snapped. "No girlfriends. Until I tell you." She sent the message as he ordered, feeling her connection with the outside world being cut even further. Kate responded, "Are you okay, Liz?" But Lisa could not write the truth. Steve stood nearby, looking at the screen, and she typed, "Yeah, just busy. Talk to you later." He nodded, took the phone, and put it in his pocket. Control spread further. Steve decided what she would wear. One morning, he opened her closet, sorted through her dresses, and pulled out a gray skirt and a white blouse. "Put these on," he said, throwing the clothes on the bed. Lisa wanted to ask why not her favorite green dress, but remained silent. She put on what he chose, feeling like a mannequin. He looked her over and nodded. "That's better. No bright colors. You're not at a party." Food also became his territory. He forbade her to cook what she liked, no hot sauces, no experiments. "You cook for me," he said one day. "I want a steak, medium rare, and potatoes, without any herbs." Lisa stood at the stove, mechanically turning the meat, and thought about how they used to try new recipes together, laughing when something burned. Now that was a thing of the past. He made a schedule for her like a child. Every morning he left a note on the table. 9 o'clock kitchen cleaning, 10 o'clock laundry, 12 o'clock lunch for me, bring to the office, 14 o'clock garden. She followed him, step by step, afraid of being late or missing a point. One day she was late in the garden, watering the roses, and did not have time to wash the floors before he returned. Steve walked in, looked at the dusty corner and said, "I thought you could handle it. Guess I was wrong." His voice was icy, and Lisa muttered an apology, grabbing the mop. At night, things got even worse. He stopped saying that he loved her. He used to whisper, "I love you, Liz," to her when he went to bed, even on the most difficult days. Now these words are gone. But he still touched her. It was not what it used to be, not tenderness, not intimacy. He took her roughly, coldly, without affection, as if fulfilling a duty. Lisa lay under him, closing her eyes, trying not to think, not to feel. She told herself that this was his way of coping with the pain, that he was angry, that it would pass. But then he turned away, fell asleep, and she was left with an emptiness in her chest. A month has passed. Lisa began to lose track of the days. They merged into one gray spot. She got up, cooked, cleaned, followed his schedule, and accounted for every step. Her phone was in his pocket most of the time, and she could only take it with his permission. One day she asked to call a client. There was a logo deadline, and Steve said, "Okay, but I'm listening." He sat next to her while she spoke, and Lisa felt his gaze on her like a collar. She didn't see her friends anymore. Kate called a couple of times, but Steve told her not to answer the phone. "Tell me you don't have time," he said, and Lisa sent a dry message. Kate stopped writing, and Lisa felt her world shrinking to the walls of the house on Greenwood Lane. She missed her friends' laughter and their chat over coffee, but she didn't dare break the ban. Her wardrobe became scanty, only what Steve approved of. Her food is just what he wanted. Her sleep is on his schedule. He told her to go to bed at 10 and wake up at 6, and she obeyed, even if she couldn't sleep. She thought it was temporary, that he would soften, but time passed and nothing changed. Steve didn't shout, didn't hit her, didn't make a scene. He just controlled, methodically, confidently, as if this had become his new goal. One evening, she decided to speak. They were sitting at dinner. He was eating fried fish. She was picking potatoes with a fork. The silence was oppressive, and Lisa mustered all her courage. "Steve," she began quietly, "how much longer?" He looked up, his fork still. "How much of what?" "This," she swallowed. "Control. Schedules. Prohibitions. When will you forgive me?" He put down his fork, folded his hands on the table, and looked at her. "I said that I would forgive you when you prove that you are worthy. You haven't proven it yet." "But I'm trying." Her voice trembled. "I do everything you say. I don't go out, I don't call, I don't argue. What more do you want?" "I want you to understand what you've lost," he said coldly. "You ruined us, Liz. It's not me. You." She lowered her head, tears burning her eyes. "I understand. I feel it every day. But I can't live like this forever." "Then go away," he said, and his words struck like a knife. "The door is open. But if you stay, you will live by my rules." Lisa was silent, her fingers curled around her fork. Leave? She thought about it every night, but fear stopped her. Where will she go? Without money, without friends, with guilt gnawing at her from the inside? She remained seated, and Steve nodded as if that was her answer. At night, he took her again, just as roughly, just as without words. She lay there, looking into the darkness, and thought that this would not go away. This is not anger, not temporary punishment. This is a new reality that he created and she accepted, and she didn't know how to get out of it. 3 months have passed since Lisa agreed to become Steve's doll. 3 months that stretched into an endless series of identical days, each of which was saturated with fear and resignation. She no longer recognized herself in the mirror. Her eyes dimmed, her skin became paler, and her movements acquired the mechanical precision of a robot. The house on Greenwood Lane, once her refuge, had become a cage, with every corner a reminder of her captivity. She was afraid of Steve, not because he screamed or raised his hand, but because his calmness became her worst punishment. She was afraid to anger him, afraid to even look in his direction for too long, lest she arouse suspicion or a new order. Her life was scheduled minute by minute. Every morning began with his voice, "Liz, get up." She got up, made him coffee, and waited for him to check her phone. He scrolled through messages, calls, even notes that she no longer dared to write. If one of the clients called, he decided whether to answer her or not, and always stood nearby, listening to every word. Her friends disappeared from her life completely. Kate stopped writing after several cold responses, and others simply disappeared into the past. Steve forbade her to leave the house without him, and even the garden that she loved so much became part of his schedule. Field roses from 2 to 3. He chose her clothes, gray skirts, white blouses, nothing bright or provocative. He dictated what she ate, no sweets, no her favorite spicy foods, just what he liked. She went to bed at 10, got up at 6, and any deviation was met with his cold gaze and words, "Are you disobeying again?" Lisa learned to remain silent, nod, and obey. Her voice, her desires, her personality, all of it dissolved under his control. At night, he still touched her. This happened no less often than before, but now without warmth, without love. He took her roughly, silently, as if she were a thing and not a person. Lisa lay motionless, closing her eyes, trying not to think or feel. She told herself that this was his way of coping, that he still loved her somewhere deep inside. But each time this hope faded, leaving only emptiness. She felt like a prisoner. Every step, every breath was under his supervision. She was afraid to drop her fork at dinner, afraid to cough without permission, afraid even to look out of the window for too long in case he thought she was up to something. Her world narrowed to the walls of the house, to his voice, to his rules. She stopped crying, the tears dried up, replaced by dull apathy. But inside, deep under this shell, fear smoldered. She didn't know how long she could live like this. One night, everything changed. Lisa lay in bed, pretending to be asleep. It became her habit to fall asleep later than him, so as not to feel his gaze, not to hear his breathing too close. Steve turned to the wall as usual, and soon his breathing became even. She thought he had fallen asleep and was already beginning to fall into an uneasy half-sleep when she heard a quiet sound, the vibration of his phone on the nightstand. She opened her eyes, barely moving. Steve stirred, took the phone, and got out of bed. His steps were quiet, but Lisa knew every creak of the floorboards in this house. He left the bedroom, closing the door, and headed into the living room. Her heart began to pound. He never got up at night to make calls. Work remained outside the threshold of their house, even on the busiest days. Something was wrong. Lisa waited, listening. The silence was oppressive, but a minute later she heard his voice, low, muffled, coming from behind the wall. She could not make out the words, only the intonation, calm, confident, almost businesslike. Her curiosity overcame her fear. She slowly, trying not to make a sound, swung her legs off the bed and crept to the door. Opening it an inch, she froze, peering into the twilight of the corridor. The light from the living room fell in a thin strip, and Steve's voice became clearer. "No, she hasn't broken yet," he said, and these words hit Lisa like an icy wind. But soon, it's a matter of time. She held her breath, her heart squeezed so hard that she almost suffocated. He talked about her. With whom? Why? She pressed herself against the doorframe, trying to hear more. "Yes, I know what I'm doing," he continued. "She thinks I'm angry, that this is a punishment." Let him think. The longer she believes, the easier it is to hold her. Lisa felt the floor disappear from under her feet. He didn't try to forgive her. He didn't express his anger. He played with her coldly, calculatingly, like a predator with prey. Her mind was spinning, trying to comprehend what she had heard. "It's not broken." Hold. These words echoed in her head, tearing apart the last remnants of her illusions. "No, I'm not going to leave," he said, and a shadow of a grin flashed in his voice. "She herself gave me a reason. Now this is my home, my rules. Everything is under control." Silence. Then steps. Lisa pulled away from the door, rushed to the bed, and lay down, pulling the blanket up to her chin. Her heart was beating so loudly that she was afraid he would hear. Steve came in, put the phone on the nightstand, and lay down next to him. She lay still, pretending to sleep, until his breathing became even again. When she was sure he was asleep, her eyes opened. She stared at the ceiling, and for the first time in months, the tears returned. But these were not tears of despair, but tears of horror. He didn't love her. He wasn't angry. He enjoyed it, her fear, her submission, her broken spirit. Whatever punishment she accepted was a game, and she was a pawn. In the morning, she got up as usual, made coffee, and served him breakfast. Steve looked at her, as always, coldly, appraisingly. But now she saw in his eyes not pain, but something dark, predatory. "What are you doing today?" he asked, taking a sip of coffee. "Whatever you say," she answered quietly, looking down. "Clean up the basement, and have dinner ready by 6. Steak. You know how much I love it." She nodded, but something shifted inside her. She no longer believed that it would pass. She knew the truth, and now she had to decide what to do about it. Lisa woke up with a heavy feeling in her chest. The night she overheard Steve's conversation couldn't get out of her mind. His words, "She hasn't broken yet, but soon," sounded in her ears like an ominous whisper. She lay there, looking at the ceiling while he slept next to her, and for the first time in months, a faint flame lit up inside her, not of hope, but of something else. Anger, despair, determination. She couldn't exactly name the feeling, but she knew one thing. She didn't want to be his toy anymore. She was tired of being afraid, tired of obeying, tired of losing herself. The morning passed according to the usual scenario. She got up, made coffee, and served him breakfast toast with an egg as he ordered. Steve sat at the table, scrolling through her phone, checking her empty inbox. He had cut her off from everyone a long time ago, and the screen remained dead, like her old life. Lisa stood at the stove, clutching a rag in her hands, and felt the tension growing inside. She couldn't continue living like this, not after what she had heard. He wasn't going to forgive her. He wanted to break her, keep her under control, and enjoy her weakness. And if she doesn't do something now, she will lose herself forever. She took a deep breath, turned to him, and said, "Steve, I want to work." He froze, his hand with the phone stopped in the air. Slowly, almost theatrically, he raised his eyes and looked at her. Lisa felt her heart pound, but did not look away. She expected anger, refusal, a cold no. But instead he smiled, a thin, barely noticeable smile that sent a chill down her spine. "Work?" he asked, putting the phone on the table. His voice was calm, but there was a hint of mockery in it. "Interesting. And where are you going to work, Liz?" She swallowed, trying to keep her voice even. "I am a designer. I have clients. I can go back to freelancing. Or find something in the office. I need to do something." Steve leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms over his chest. His gaze became appraising, as if he were weighing her words. "You need to do something," he repeated slowly. "I thought you were busy. Cleaning, cooking, gardening, isn't that enough?" "That's not it," she said, her voice wavering, but she continued. "I want to feel useful. Not just here. I want to work. Steve, please." He was silent, looking at her, and this silence was worse than a scream. Lisa felt her resolve begin to melt under his gaze, but it was too late to retreat. She took a step, a small, hesitant step, but a step. Finally, he nodded, and her heart leapt with relief for a moment. "Okay," he said, and his smile widened. "You will work. But in my company, under my control." Lisa froze. She expected anything, a ban, conditions, even ridicule, but not this. His company. She knew that he owned a construction company, that he had an office in downtown Portland, a dozen employees, and contracts. But she was never part of this world. Her work has always been separate, her own. "In your company?" she asked, trying to understand what he meant. "But I'm a designer. You have no tasks for me." "They will," he said, getting up from the table. "I need someone who will take care of papers, presentations, and design. You love drawing your logos, right? So you will be useful. But on my terms." She opened her mouth to protest, but he raised his hand to stop her. "You wanted to work, Liz. I'm giving you a chance. But don't think it will be the same. You don't sit at home alone, don't run around to meetings, don't chat with clients whenever you want. You work for me, under my supervision, every day. Agree? Her mind was spinning. This wasn't what she wanted. She dreamed of freedom, of a return to her profession, of a chance to breathe outside these walls. And he offered a new cage just with different bars. But to refuse meant returning to the old ways, to schedules, to silence, to his cold hands at night. She clenched her fists under the table and nodded. I agree, she whispered. Okay, he said, and a note of satisfaction flashed in his voice. You'll start tomorrow. I'll tell you what to wear, and don't be late. He left for work, taking her phone as usual, and Lisa remained sitting, looking at the empty cup. She took a step, but instead of freedom, she received even more of his power. And yet it was something a chance to get out of the house, see people, feel at least a little alive. She clung to this thought like a straw. The next day, Steve woke her up at 6 in the morning. Get up, he said, and she obediently stood up. He chose her clothes, black trousers, a white shirt, a formal jacket. Nothing flashy, he repeated. You represent me. Lisa put on everything he ordered, feeling like a doll in a store window. He took her to the office, a small two-story house on the outskirts of the center with a sign, Wilson Construction. She sat in the passenger seat, looking out the window, and for the first time in months, she saw the streets, the people, the life outside of Greenwood Lane. At the office, he introduced her to the staff, 5 men and 1 woman, a secretary named Anna. This is Lisa, my wife, he said. She will help with papers and presentations. Anna smiled at her, but Lisa noticed curiosity in her gaze. The others simply nodded without asking questions. Steve led her to a small table in the corner next to his office, where the glass wall allowed him to see her every move. This is your place, he said. Today you will sort out the old contracts. Make a list. I'll check in the evening. What about the design? She asked quietly. You talked about presentations. First this, he snapped. Prove that you can handle it. She sat down at the table, feeling his gaze through the glass. The work was boring, monotonous, sorting papers, printing tables, nothing in common with her previous projects. But she did it, trying not to make a mistake, knowing that he was watching. At lunchtime, he told her to get him coffee from the coffee shop across the street, and she went, setting foot outside alone for the first time in months. Her heart was beating faster, but she knew she only had 10 minutes. He had timed it. By the end of the day, her desk was littered with papers, and her back ached from sitting. Steve walked in, took her list, looked through it, and nodded. Not bad, he said. You will continue tomorrow. At home, he checked her phone empty, as always, and told her to prepare dinner. Lisa stood at the stove, feeling fatigue mixed with disappointment. She wanted a job to take back control, but all she got was a new version of it. He was there in the office, at home, in her every move. She didn't escape from the cage. She simply exchanged one for another. Lisa sat at her small desk in the corner of the Wilson construction office, her fingers mechanically shuffling papers. Contracts, invoices, supplier lists, work that required neither creativity nor soul, but Steve had insisted she start there. It had been a week since he had agreed to give her a job, and every day she could feel his control growing tighter. She had hoped that the office would be her salvation, a small window into the world beyond Greenwood Lane, but instead it turned into another cage with transparent walls through which he watched her. His office was 10 steps from her desk, separated by a glass partition. Lisa saw his silhouette through the blinds. He was sitting at his desk, talking on the phone or typing something, but his gaze kept rising to her. She felt it even with her back, a sharp, piercing sensation, as if he could see her thoughts. He watched her constantly, and it was not just observation. It was control, total, inexorable, penetrating every aspect of her life. In the morning, he brought her to the office, checked her clothes today. It was a gray skirt and a black sweater, chosen by him, and left her at the table with a task. Sort out the letters, he said today, throwing a stack of envelopes on her desk. Lisa started sorting, but an hour later he came in, took a stack, and started reading. Every letter from clients, suppliers, even advertising leaflets passed through his hands. "What is this?" he asked, holding a letter from a local architectural firm. "They are asking to update the building design," she answered quietly, trying not to look him in the eyes. "I have to include their notes in the presentation." "Show me what you write," he said, returning the letter. "No answers without my permission." Lisa nodded, feeling her throat tighten. She opened the laptop, the one he'd given her, without access to her old files or personal email, and began typing a draft. Half an hour later, he appeared again, stood behind her, and looked at the screen. His breathing was even, but his presence pressed down like a heavy weight. "Take out the word urgent," he said, pointing to the line, "and don't write glad to help. This is work, not your girlfriend's." She erased the words, her fingers trembling. He nodded and left, but the feeling of his gaze remained. Lisa knew he had seen her letters. He knew who she was communicating with, or rather, who he was allowing her to communicate with. All her contacts were limited to colleagues in the office and clients he approved of. Even Anna, the secretary with whom Lisa had exchanged a few words on the first day, was now keeping her distance. "Steve had told her not to distract my wife." Meetings became another challenge. When employees or clients gathered in the office, Steve insisted that Lisa be present. "You're part of the team." But she wasn't part of the team. She sat in the corner with a laptop, writing down what he ordered, and he came and sat next to her, watching. One day, a client, an elderly man in a suit, approached her with a question about the delivery schedule. "Mrs. Wilson, could you clarify the timing?" he asked, smiling. Lisa opened her mouth to respond, but Steve interrupted. "She will clarify through me," he said, his voice firm. "All questions to me." The client nodded, slightly embarrassed, and Lisa lowered her eyes, feeling her cheeks burning. Steve put his hand on her chair, not hugging, but as if marking territory. He made sure that she behaved correctly, did not smile too often, did not say too much, did not go beyond his script. After the meeting, he took her aside and said, "Don't look at them like that. You're here to work, not flirt." "I wasn't flirting," she objected quietly. He just asked. "I'll decide what you do," he snapped. "And how?" Lisa felt like she was suffocating. The office that was supposed to be her release became a new prison. At home, she could at least pretend that she was busy cleaning or cooking and hide in the garden for an hour. There was no shelter here. His eyes were everywhere through the glass, behind her back, in her every word. She sat at the table, typing, sorting, but every click of the keys seemed to her like a link in a chain that he was tightening. One day, she tried to write to Kate. It was stupid, impulsive. She took her old phone, which he left at home, and typed, "I feel bad. Help." But she didn't have time to send it. Steve entered the kitchen earlier than she expected and saw the screen. "What is this?" he asked, his voice icy. Lisa shuddered, dropping the phone on the table. "Nothing," she muttered. "I was just thinking." He took the phone, read it, erased the message, and looked at her. "You don't think without me, Liz. I thought you understood." "I'm sorry," she whispered, her hands shaking. He nodded, put the phone in his pocket, and said, "Tomorrow you will stay at home. The office will wait. Get the basement in order." She spent the next day in the basement cleaning dusty boxes while he was at work. She was punished for trying to escape, and this only made her feel more suffocated. When he returned, checked the basement, and nodded, she felt no relief, only emptiness. Control continued in the office. He knew when she got up to drink water, how many minutes she spent in the restroom, with whom she exchanged glances. Anna approached her one day with a question about a printer, and Steve immediately appeared, saying, "I'll sort it out." Lisa saw Anna retreat and realized, even here she has no allies. By the end of the second week it broke. She was sitting at the table, looking at the screen, and suddenly felt tears burning her eyes. She couldn't breathe, not literally, but inside, somewhere deep, the air had run out. Steve noticed and walked over and stood over her. "What's wrong with you?" he asked, his voice dry. "I can't," she whispered without looking up. "I'm suffocating, Steve." He paused, then sat down next to her, so close that she felt the warmth of his body. "You wanted to work," he said. "I gave you a job. If you can't, go home. Choose." Lisa clenched her fists under the table. Choice? She had no choice. Home or office, everywhere are his eyes, his voice, his rules. She wiped her tears and nodded. "I'll stay," she managed. "Okay," he said, standing up. "Then work." She stayed, but every day she felt she would melt away. He saw her letters, knew her words, followed her every step. She was suffocating, but did not know how to escape. Lisa sat at her desk in the office, looking at her laptop screen. The letters merged into a gray mass. Her fingers lay motionless on the keyboard. Behind the glass wall, Steve was talking on the phone, his voice muffled, but she knew he was watching her as always. It had been 2 weeks since she started working at his company, and each day made her feel more suffocated. She could not breathe not only in the office, but also at home, where his rules, his gaze, his cold touches suffocated her. She felt like a shadow, an empty shell, and understood. If she didn't escape, she would disappear completely. The thought of leaving matured slowly. At first, it was just a fantasy to close your eyes and imagine how she leaves, gets on the bus, disappears somewhere far away where he won't find her. But every day the fantasy became a plan. She didn't know where she would go, she didn't know how she would live, but she knew one thing. She needed to get out. She was tired of being afraid, tired of obeying, tired of being his doll. The overheard conversation, "She hasn't broken yet, but soon," was the last straw. He wasn't going to let her go. He wanted to break her, and she decided that she would not let him do this. The plan was born out of desperation. She had no money. Steve took her card, gave out only cash for small needs, which she accounted for down to the cent. Her phone was under his control, but in the office she noticed the old notebook of Anna, the secretary, lying on the table in the reception area. There was a number for a taxi, a local service that was called for customers. Lisa secretly wrote it down on a piece of paper, hiding it in her trouser pocket. It was risky, but she decided to do it. At home, she began to prepare. Steve had left for a meeting with suppliers and had to return late. She had several hours. She packed a bag, a small one, so as not to arouse suspicion if he suddenly returned earlier. Several pairs of underwear, a t-shirt, jeans, a toothbrush. She couldn't take more. He checked her closet, knew every item. Money was a problem, but she found $20 in an old jacket, not much money, but enough for a taxi to the bus station. She'll figure it out later. Maybe he'll call Kate, maybe he'll find shelter. The main thing is to leave. She waited until the clock showed 8 o'clock in the evening. Steve usually called if he was late, but today the phone was silent, a good sign. Lisa took the old cell phone he had left at home after he caught her texting Kate and dialed the number of the taxi. Her voice trembled as she whispered the address, but the dispatcher confirmed, "The car will be there in 10 minutes." She turned off the phone, hid it under the sofa cushion, and stood by the window, looking at the road. My heart was pounding, my palms were sweating, but a strange feeling was growing in my chest, not freedom yet, but the anticipation of it. The taxi pulled up, a yellow sedan with a worn logo. Lisa grabbed her bag, turned off the lights in the house, and stepped towards the door. Her hand froze on the handle. She looked around. The cats, Marley and Luna, were looking at her from the sofa, their eyes sparkling in the twilight. It hurt her to leave them, but she knew that if she stayed, she would lose more. She took a deep breath and opened the door. The cold air hit her face, the rain drizzled, leaving drops on her hair. She took a step towards the taxi. Her legs were shaking, but she forced herself to walk. The driver opened the window and waved his hand. "This way?" Lisa nodded, already reaching out her hand to the door, when she heard the sound of a motor. Her heart stopped. She turned around and saw his car, Steve's black pickup truck, slowly turning the corner. The headlights illuminated her like a spotlight, and she froze. He stopped at the house, got out, and stood by the car, crossing his arms over his chest. His silhouette in the headlights seemed huge, impenetrable. Lisa felt her legs give way. The taxi was still standing nearby. The driver was looking at her, but she could not move. Steve stepped closer, his face illuminated by the street lamp calm, with the same icy smile that made her blood run cold. "Did you really think I wouldn't stop you?" he said. His voice was soft, almost affectionate, but there was a threat in it. Lisa opened her mouth, but the words stuck. The bag fell out of her hands, falling onto the wet asphalt. The taxi driver cleared his throat. "Are we going or not?" Steve turned to him, took out his wallet, and threw him a tenner through the window. "She's not going anywhere," he said. "Go away." The car drove off, leaving her alone in the rain. Steve walked closer, picked up the bag from the ground, and looked at it. "Let's go home, Liz," he said, pointing to the door. She wanted to scream, run, resist, but her legs wouldn't obey. His calmness was worse than a scream. It deprived her of will. She stepped towards the house, feeling the rain mix with the tears on her cheeks. He followed her without touching, but his presence pressed on her like a wall. Inside, he closed the door, threw his bag on the floor, and sat on the sofa, looking at her. Lisa stood at the entrance, wet, trembling, not daring to raise her eyes. "Take off your clothes," he said. "Change into dry clothes, and sit down." She obeyed slowly, as if in a dream. She took off her jacket, went into the bedroom, put on an old t-shirt, and returned. He pointed to the chair opposite, and she sat down, her hands clenched into fists. "For what?" he asked finally. "Where are you going?" I can't take it anymore," she whispered. "I'm suffocating, Steve. I wanted to leave." He nodded as if her answer didn't surprise him. "Leave," he repeated. "And what would you do? Without money, without phone, without me." "I could handle it," she said, but her voice sounded uncertain. He smiled wider, and this smile was colder than the rain outside the window. "No, Liz, you couldn't handle it. You are mine, and you won't go anywhere until I decide." She swallowed, her eyes filling with tears. "You don't love me," she said quietly. "You just want to break me." He paused, looking at her, then stood up and came closer. His hand touched her chin, lifting her face. "I gave you everything," he said, "and you betrayed me. Now you live by my rules, and if you try again, it will be worse." He let her go, took his bag, and went into the bedroom. Lisa remained sitting, feeling like the last hope was dying in her chest. She tried to leave, but he was ready. He was always ready. Lisa sat in a chair, looking at the blank TV screen. The rain outside the window had died down, leaving only silence, which weighed on her more than the noise. The bag she had packed for her escape was in the bedroom. Steve did not take it apart, leaving it as a reminder of her failure. She didn't cry anymore. The tears dried up, as if the last drop of resistance had gone with them. She tried to leave, but he stopped her calmly, without shouting, with that icy smile that had become her nightmare. And now she knew. There was no way out. The next morning, he called her into the living room. She stood up, put on the gray robe he approved of, and went downstairs. Steve was sitting at the table with her phone in his hands, the same old one that she used to call a taxi. His fingers slowly scrolled through the screen, and his eyes were glued to her. "I checked your account," he said without looking up. "Did you think you could withdraw money and leave?" Lisa froze. She didn't try to withdraw money. She hasn't had access to the card since he took it. But his words made her heart clench. "I don't," she began, but he interrupted. "Don't lie, Liz. I called the bank. All your accounts are frozen. Now you won't receive anything without my signature. Not a cent." She lowered her head, feeling her world shrink even further. Her savings small, but her own, earned by freelancing before he took everything away, were the last thing that connected her with her past life. Now that too has disappeared. "The phone too," he continued, picking up her old cell phone. "I installed a tracker. Every call, every message, every step I will know. You won't hide anymore." Lisa nodded, her voice disappeared. She didn't ask how he did it, didn't argue. She knew he could do anything. He had proven it when he caught her in a taxi, and now he was proving it again. He stood up, walked over to her, and handed her the phone. "You can take it," he said. "Call whoever you want, but I will hear every word." She took the phone with trembling hands, but did not know who to call. Kate, the friend stopped writing long ago, cut off by his prohibitions. Clients, they were part of the past. Her parents were the only ones still in her thoughts. She dialed her mother's number, feeling Steve standing behind her, his breathing even, but oppressive. Lisa, the voice of Ellen, her mother, was warm but tired. "How are you, honey?" "Mom," she began, her voice trembling. It's, it's hard for me. I don't know what to do." Steve coughed slightly, and she winced, realizing he was listening. "What are you talking about, dear?" Ellen asked. "What's happened?" Lisa swallowed, trying to find the words. "Steve, I can't live like this. He controls everything." The silence on the other end of the line lasted too long. Then Ellen spoke, and her tone changed. It became softer, almost conciliatory. "Lisa, Steve is a good husband. You yourself told how he cared about you. Maybe he's just worried. Be patient, honey. Everything will work out." Lisa froze, her eyes widened. This didn't sound like her mother. Ellen always protected her, always listened. She wanted to scream, "He broke me, he won't let go." But the words stuck. She looked at Steve, and his smile thin, cold, told her everything. He spoke to them. He even got to her parents. "Thank you, Mom," she finally managed. "I will think." She hung up and Steve took the phone. "Good conversation," he said. "Do you see? Everyone is on my side." She sank onto the sofa, feeling the last threads connecting her to the outside world being torn. He surrounded her completely: bills, phone, family. She had nothing left of hers. From that day on, she was broken. Not immediately, not loudly, but quietly, imperceptibly, like cracked glass that is still holding on, but is no longer whole. She didn't argue anymore. I stopped trying to change anything. She wore the clothes he chose: gray skirts, white blouses, black sweaters. She spoke as he wanted, briefly, quietly, without objections. I lived by his rules, step by step, like an automaton. In the morning, she got up at 6, made him coffee, and waited for his instructions. "Make scrambled eggs," he would say, and she would cook. "Clean up the office," and she rode with him, sorting papers, feeling his gaze through the glass. At home, she cooked dinner: steak, potatoes, nothing spicy, nothing of her own. He checked her phone, her bag, her movements, and she didn't resist. She stopped looking in the mirror. Her eyes, once alive, were now empty, like the doll he wanted her to be. She didn't talk to her colleagues in the office. Anna tried to start a conversation once, but Lisa replied, "I don't have time," and walked away, knowing Steve was watching. She didn't call anyone, didn't write, didn't think about escaping. He won. At night, he still took her roughly, without words, without warmth. She lay motionless, looking into the darkness, and felt nothing. Her body was his, as was her life. She no longer asked how long it would last. She knew, forever. One day, he left her a note. "Wear a blue dress. We are going to dinner with a client." She put on a dress, the only color he allowed, and went with him. At dinner, she sat silently, smiled when he ordered, answered yes or no if he nodded. The client praised her. "What a sweet wife you have, Steve." He smiled. "Yes, she is." At home, he said, "You behaved well." This was the closest he had come to praise in months. Lisa nodded and went to bed, feeling only emptiness. She broke down completely. Her will, her dreams, herself, everything is gone. She became what he wanted: obedient, quiet, empty. And in this emptiness, there was not even pain left, only endless, gray silence. Lisa stood at the stove, stirring the sauce for dinner. Her movements were precise, controlled, the result of months spent under his gaze. The steak was sizzling in the pan, the potatoes were roasting in the oven. Everything was exactly as Steve wanted. She didn't think about the taste, about whether she liked the food herself. Her thoughts had long ago dulled, becoming as gray as the clothes he chose for her. The blue dress she wore to dinner with a client a week ago was a rare exception, but even then she felt less like a person and more like a decoration: beautiful, silent, obedient. Steve entered the kitchen, threw his briefcase on a chair, and sat down at the table. Lisa didn't turn around. She knew that he would tell her what to do next. He always spoke. She placed a glass of water in front of him without ice, as he liked, and returned to the stove, awaiting instructions. "Smells good," he said, his voice level and emotionless. "Serve it." She nodded and put the food on plates and placed it in front of him. Then she sat down opposite her, folding her hands in her lap, as he had taught her over these months. She didn't eat until he started, another rule ingrained in her bones. Steve picked up his fork, cut off a piece of steak, chewed it, and nodded. "Okay," he said, "eat." Lisa took a fork, picked up a small piece of potato, and put it in her mouth. She had no sense of taste. Food was just fuel, a necessity, not a pleasure. They ate in silence, as always, until he put the cutlery down and looked at her. His gaze was different, not cold, not appraising, but somehow strange. She tensed, waiting for a new order. "Congratulations, Lisa," he said suddenly, and his lips slightly curved into a smile. "Now you are an ideal wife." She froze, her fork stopping halfway to the plate. His words hung in the air, heavy as stone, and she didn't know what to do with them. Ideal wife. After everything, months of control, her broken spirit, her escape that he stopped. She looked up, meeting his gaze for the first time in a long time. "What? What do you mean?" she asked quietly, her voice hoarse from silence. Steve leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "You heard," he said. "You're perfect. Everything I wanted. You no longer argue. You don't try to escape. You don't break the rules. You do what I say when I say. This is what I was waiting for." Lisa swallowed, her fingers gripping the fork tighter. She didn't know what to feel: relief, fear, emptiness. His words sounded like praise, but there was something ominous in them, as if he was summing up her destruction. "I tried," she squeezed out, not knowing what else to say. "I know," he nodded. "And you did it. Do you remember how it all began? You betrayed me, Liz. You destroyed us. But now," he paused, looking at her, "now you're mine. Fully." She lowered her eyes, feeling her heart clench. His congratulations was not forgiveness. It was a victory, his victory over her. She wanted to say something, to object, but the words stuck, as always. "Aren't you happy?" he asked, and there was a hint of mockery in his voice. "I thought you'd be happy. You wanted me to stay so that everything would work out." "I wanted." She began, but fell silent. What did she want? For him to forgive her, so that they go back to the past. She no longer remembered. "I don't know, Steve." He leaned forward slightly, his gaze sharper. "Don't know?" he asked again. "Then I'll tell you. You wanted me not to leave. I didn't leave. You wanted to prove that you are worthy. You proved it. Now you are the ideal wife. What else do you need?" Lisa looked at him, her mind spinning. "Do you need it?" She didn't know what she needed, because she had long since dissolved under his control. She wore his clothes, spoke his words, lived his life, and now he called it perfection. "I just." She swallowed. "I thought you would forgive me someday." Steve grinned, short and cold. "Excuse me," he said. "I don't forgive betrayal, Liz. But I gave you a chance, and you used it. Look at you. You are no longer the one who ran around the bars, who lied to me. You are my wife. Real." Her eyes burned with tears, but she did not let them fall. She didn't know what to feel. His words were both a reward and a sentence. She achieved what he wanted, but lost everything that was hers. "Thank you," she finally whispered, because he was waiting for an answer. "Don't thank me," he said, getting up. "This is not a gift. This is what you were meant to be from the very beginning. Go to bed. Get up early tomorrow." She nodded, put away the plates, and went into the bedroom. Lying in the dark, she thought about his words. The ideal wife, they sounded in her head like an echo, but brought neither joy nor relief. She felt empty, a shell he had fashioned at will. Her accounts were frozen, her phone was tracked, her parents were under his influence, her life belonged to him. And now he congratulated her for it. The next day she got up at 6, as always. He chose a gray skirt and a white blouse for her and ordered her to prepare an omelet. In the office, she sat at the table, sorting papers while he looked through the glass. She didn't argue, didn't look away once again, didn't talk to Anna. When he called her to a meeting, she sat silently, writing down his instructions. "You look good today," he said later, when they were driving home. "Like a real wife." "Thank you," she answered quietly. "Is something wrong?" he asked, glancing at her. "No," she said. "Everything is as you want." He nodded, satisfied. "That's right," he said. "You finally understand." At home, she cooked dinner, cleaned, and went to bed according to his schedule. She didn't know what to feel. Was it a victory? Defeat? She couldn't make it out. Her heart was silent, her mind obeyed. She became the ideal wife, his ideal wife. And in this ideal, there was nothing of her own left. Lisa stood at the kitchen window, looking at the garden. The roses she had once loved so much now seemed foreign to her. She watered them according to Steve's schedule, feeling neither joy nor affection. Another month had passed since he called her the ideal wife, and her life had become even more mechanical. She got up at 6, cooked him breakfast, went to the office, sorted papers, returned home, cooked dinner, and went to bed at 10. Her voice was quiet, her movements were precise, her thoughts were empty. She did not argue, did not look in his direction once again, did not dream of escape. She was his completely, just as he wanted. Steve seemed pleased. He no longer checked her phone every 5 minutes, the tracker did it for him. He didn't rummage through her things, didn't watch her every move in the office as closely as before. But his control did not weaken, it simply became as familiar as the air she breathed. Lisa didn't know whether to rejoice at this or be even more afraid. She stopped asking herself questions. She simply lived or existed by his rules. That evening, he returned home earlier than usual. Lisa was standing at the stove, cooking chicken and potatoes, when she heard the door slam. She didn't turn around, she waited for him to tell her what to do. But instead of the usual serve or check the mail, he came up behind her and lightly touched her shoulder. "Leave it, Liz," he said, his voice soft, almost warm. "We're going to dinner." She froze, the spoon in her hand stopping. Dinner? They hadn't been out together since the time he took her to a client to show her what a good wife she had become. She turned slowly, looking at him. "Where?" she asked quietly. "To the restaurant," he answered, and his lips curved slightly into a smile. "Le Bistro. Get dressed. Wear something nice. A blue dress will do." Lisa nodded, her mind spinning with surprise. Le Bistro was an expensive place with white tablecloths, live music, waiters in tuxedos. They went there in the early years of their marriage, when things were different. She went into the bedroom, put on a blue dress, the same one he had approved of earlier, and looked in the mirror. Her face was pale, her eyes dull, but the dress fit well. She didn't know why he was doing this, but she didn't ask. She stopped asking a long time ago. He was waiting for her downstairs, wearing a dark suit that made him look like the Steve she had once loved. He opened the car door and helped her sit down, gestures that had not happened for months. At the restaurant, he booked a table by the window, overlooking the city lights. The waiter brought the wine red for her, white for him, and Steve raised his glass. "For you, Liz," he said, looking into her eyes. "You did a good job." She raised her glass, her hand shaking slightly. "Thank you," she whispered, not knowing what else to say. He was attentive, gentle, as if nothing had happened. He asked if she liked the food, talked about work, even joked about the weather. Lisa answered briefly, as she was used to, but his tone confused her. She thought for a moment that it was all over, that he was tired of playing, that this was his way of saying that control was over. When the waiter left, he took a small box out of his pocket and placed it in front of her. "Open it," he said. She opened it, and inside was a silver necklace with a small teardrop pendant. Beautiful, simple, but expensive. Her heart sank. "This is for you," he said, smiling. "Put it on." Lisa put on the necklace, her fingers trembling. She looked at him, trying to understand. "For what?" she asked finally. "For making you perfect," he answered, sipping his wine. "I told you so. You are my ideal wife." She nodded, feeling the warmth from his words mixing with the cold inside. It was like their past life dinner, a gift, his smile. She almost believed that everything was back. But then he put down his glass, leaned across the table towards her, and spoke more quietly. "I have an important dinner with my partners on Friday," he said. "I want you there. An ideal wife. Like today. Smile, be silent if I don't tell you to speak. You'll do this for me, right?" "Yes," she answered automatically. He nodded and then leaned even closer, his lips almost touching her ear. "And then," he whispered, "I'll let you go." Lisa froze. Her breathing stopped and her eyes widened. She slowly pulled away, looking at him. "What did you say?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "I said I would let you go," he repeated, leaning back. His smile did not disappear, but something dark flashed in it. "After dinner on Friday. You deserve a reward, Liz. You proved that you can be mine, and I will give you freedom." She looked at him, her mind spinning. Will he let you go? It was too unexpected, too strange. She didn't know whether to believe him. Was this a joke, trap, or did he actually see her break and decide it was game over? "Are you serious?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Seriously," he said, looking into her eyes. "You don't think I'm lying, do you? I keep my word. You know it." "But why?" she burst out. "After everything. Why now?" He shrugged, taking a sip of his wine. "Because you did what I wanted," he said. "You have become perfect. I have nothing more to demand from you. On Friday, you show this to my partners, and that's it. You are free." Lisa was silent. Her fingers squeezed the pendant on her neck. She didn't know what to feel. Joy? Fear? Mistrust? His words sounded like a promise, but there was something wrong with them, as if he was still toying with her. "And then what?" she asked finally. "Where will I go?" "Wherever you want," he said, smiling. "You will have money, a telephone, your life. I'll return everything. But first, it's Friday. Will you do it?" "Yes," she said, her voice empty. "Okay," he nodded. "Then eat. The night is long." She took the fork, but the food got stuck in her throat. He will let her go. Or not. She didn't know what to believe, but she clung to these words like a drowning man clinging to a straw. There were 3 days left until Friday, and she decided to wait. Lisa stood in front of the mirror in the bedroom, looking at her reflection. The blue dress Steve had chosen hugged her figure, and the silver necklace and pendant glittered around her neck. She applied light makeup, a little mascara, pale pink lipstick, as he ordered. Her hair was styled in a neat bun, not a single strand stood out. She looked perfect, like the doll he had created over these months. The 3 days since dinner at Le Bistro passed in tense anticipation. His words, "I will let you go," sounded in her head, but she could not fully believe them. It was Steve. The one who surrounded her broke her, made her dependent. She was afraid it was a trap, but she clung to the hope that he was telling the truth. Today was the evening of dinner with his partners. Steve said it was important, a major contract that would strengthen his company. "You have to be perfect, Liz," he repeated in the morning. "Smile, be nice, don't say too much. This is your last test." She nodded, as always, and began to prepare. Her hand shook as she combed her hair, but she forced herself to concentrate. If he really lets her go after this, she will do whatever he wants. One evening, one last act. He was waiting for her downstairs, wearing a dark suit and tie that she had ironed yesterday. He looked her up and down, nodded, and said, "You look good. Let's go." They rode in silence. Lisa looked out the window at the lights of Portland and thought about what would happen next. He promised to return her money, phone, and freedom. She imagined herself leaving, maybe to Kate, maybe to another city. She didn't know how she would start again, but it didn't matter. The main thing is to get out. The dinner took place in a private room at the Monroe restaurant, another expensive place with crystal chandeliers and soft carpets. Steve's partners, 3 men in suits and 1 woman with sharp cheekbones, were already waiting at the table. Lisa came in, holding his hand as he ordered, and smiled softly, restrainedly, as he taught. Steve introduced her. "This is my wife, Lisa. She helps me in the office." "Nice to meet you," said one of the men, an elderly man with gray hair. "Steve talked about you. You are a designer, right?" Lisa opened her mouth, but Steve squeezed her hand, answering for her. Was, now she is my right hand. Let's sit down. She sat down next to him, her smile remaining in place. Dinner began with appetizers, oysters, and wine, and Lisa played her part. She laughed when Steve joked, nodded when he talked about the project, held his hand when he laid it on the table. The partners were happy. She saw it in their smiles, in the way they relaxed. The woman, Elizabeth, even said, "You have a wonderful wife, Steve, so calm and elegant." "Thank you," he replied, looking at Lisa. "She's perfect." Lisa smiled, but something sank inside her. His words sounded like praise, but there was a coldness in them, the same one she had heard for months. She took a glass of wine and sipped, trying not to think. Just a little more. Dinner is almost over. The main thing is to survive to the end. The dishes changed: salad, then meat, dessert. The conversation was about the contract, about deadlines, about money. Lisa remained silent as he wished, interjecting only yes or of course when he nodded to her. She was perfect, the shadow he had sculpted. The partners signed the papers, shook Steve's hand, and patted him on the shoulder. Elizabeth said, "Great evening, Steve, and thanks to your wife for the company." "She knows how to behave," he answered, and his hand fell on her shoulder. Dinner was coming to an end. The waiters took away the plates, and the partners began to say goodbye. Lisa felt her heart beating faster. Soon, he said later. She waited for this later, clinging to his promise. When the last guest left, they were left alone at the table. Steve ordered more wine, leaned back in his chair, and looked at her. "You were good, Liz," he said, his voice soft. "I did everything as it should." "Thank you," she replied quietly, her fingers clenching the napkin. He nodded, took a sip of wine, and then leaned towards her, his face very close. She felt his breath on her cheek, and he whispered, "Now I don't need you anymore." Lisa turned pale. Her body became cold, as if the blood had drained from her face. She slowly turned to him, her eyes widening. "What?" she breathed, her voice trembling. "You heard," he said, pulling away. His smile was thin and cold. "I don't need you anymore. You played your part. The perfect wife for this evening. The contract has been signed. It's over." She looked at him, her mind refusing to understand. He took everything from her: her freedom, her bills, her friends, her will. Made her dependent, broke her to the core. And now, will he throw it away, like an unnecessary thing? "You said you would let me go," she whispered, her voice weak. "I'm letting go," he said, shrugging his shoulders. "You're free, Liz. You can go. But," he paused, looking at her, "what do you have left?" She swallowed, her throat dry. He was right. She has nothing left. The money is frozen. The phone is under his control. His parents are on his side. She was empty, a shell he had created and was now throwing away. "Why?" she asked, her voice breaking. "Why did you do this?" "Because I could," he replied, his tone matter of fact. "You betrayed me. I showed you what happens when you betray. And now I don't need you. Go wherever you want, and do whatever you want." He stood up, threw a few bills on the table, and walked towards the exit. Lisa remained sitting, her hands trembling. She turned pale, her world completely collapsed. He didn't just break it. He destroyed it and threw it away like garbage, and she didn't know what to do next. Lisa sat at the table at Monroe, her fingers gripping the edge of the tablecloth. Steve's words, "I don't need you anymore," still rang in her ears, cold and sharp as a blade. He stood up, threw the money on the table, and left, leaving her alone among the empty glasses and crumpled napkins. She turned pale, her body trembled, but at that moment something inside her clicked. He thought he had broken it completely. He thought she was an empty shell to be thrown away. But Steve underestimated her. He didn't know what she was getting ready for, that she had a plan. She didn't break the way he thought she would. Yes, she obeyed, was silent, followed his rules, but not because she gave up, but because she waited. Months of control, humiliation, his cold touches, all this was her disguise. Lisa learned to pretend an ideal wife, an obedient shadow so that he would relax, so that he would believe in his victory. And while he enjoyed his power, she quietly but confidently collected weapons. It all started after her unsuccessful escape. When he caught her in the taxi, with that icy smile, she realized that open resistance would not work. He was too attentive, too strong. She needed another way. And then she remembered about the old voice recorder, small, cheap, bought back in Chicago for recording design ideas. It was in a box in the basement, among the junk that Steve hadn't bothered to check. The next day, when he told her to clean it up, she found it, hid it under a stack of old magazines, and began to think. She made her first recording a week later. Steve was talking on the phone in the living room, thinking she was sleeping. She crept to the bedroom door, turned on the recorder, and caught his words. "We'll transfer the money through an offshore company. No one will know." This was not just a conversation, it was evidence. Financial frauds that she heard about in the office, but never fully understood. She saved the recording by hiding the recorder in an old bag that he never touched. Then there was a spare phone. She found it in the office, an old push-button device, forgotten by one of the employees in a desk drawer. Steve was keeping an eye on her new phone, but this one was out of his reach. She hid it in the basement, behind a box of Christmas tree decorations, and only used it at night when he was sleeping. Her messages were short, sent to the only number she knew by heart, Kate. "I need help. Don't call. Wait." Kate replied, "I'm here. Tell me when." Lisa deleted the correspondence, turned off the phone, and waited. She collected the evidence slowly, patiently. Steve's conversations with shady people, men whose voices were rough, whose words hinted at outlaw deals. She wrote down their names, dates, snatches of phrases. "Give him the cash. Make sure the IRS doesn't interfere." In the office, she took photographs of documents, contracts with forged signatures, invoices with inflated amounts on the same old phone while he was in meetings. She knew it was a risk, but she did everything quietly under his nose while he looked at her through the glass, thinking that she was sorting papers. She wrote down the most important things after that dinner at Le Bistro. His whisper, "I will let you go," was on the recorder hidden in her purse. She didn't know what he would say, but she felt it would be the key. And now, when he threw, "I don't need you anymore," in her face, she realized this is the end of his game, but the beginning of her revenge. Lisa stood up from the table in the restaurant. Her legs were shaking, but a new fire was burning in her chest. She went outside. The rain began again, but she did not notice it. She walked home. The taxi was too risky. He could track it. The journey took an hour, but she did not feel tired. Her mind was clear for the first time in months. He thought he had thrown it away. He was wrong. The house was quiet. Steve hasn't returned, yet he was probably celebrating with his partners. She went up to the bedroom and took out the recorder and phone from their hiding places. Records, photographs, messages, everything was in place. She turned on the recorder and listened to his whisper, "Now I don't need you anymore." Her lips pursed. He took everything from her: money, freedom, will, made her dependent, broke her. But she was not completely broken. She dialed Kate, her voice quiet but firm. "It's me," she said. "I need your help. Now." "Lisa?" Kate's voice was full of anxiety. "Where are you? What did he do?" "That's it," she answered. "But I have proof. His machinations, his words. I want to destroy him." "Damn, Liz!" Kate fell silent for a moment. "Are you serious?" "Yes," she said. "He thinks I'm nobody. I'll show him who I am." "Okay," Kate said. "Come to me. Bring everything you have. I'll find a lawyer." Lisa hung up the phone and collected the evidence in a small bag, the same one she took to escape. She heard the sound of a car. Steve was back. Her heart began to pound, but she didn't panic. She hid the bag under the bed, lay down, and pretended to be asleep. He walked in, threw the keys on the nightstand, and lay down next to her. His hand rested on her thigh, as always, but she didn't move. He thought it was broken. He didn't know what she was waiting for. In the morning, he went to the office, leaving her with the usual, "Clean the kitchen." Lisa waited until his car disappeared around the corner, took her bag, and got out. She called a taxi from Kate's phone. Steve couldn't track it. When the car arrived, she sat down, clutching her bag, and said, 14 Caitlin Road. The driver nodded, and they drove off. Lisa looked out the window, feeling her fear give way to determination. He wanted to break her. He wanted to throw it away. But she underestimated herself, and now he will pay. Lisa sat in Kate's small living room, clutching a cup of tea that her friend had pressed into her hands. A bag of evidence lay on the coffee table, a voice recorder, an old telephone, scraps of paper with notes. Kate paced around the room, her steps fast and nervous, while she spoke on the phone with a lawyer she had found through friends. Lisa was silent, her gaze glued to the bag. She ran away. She did it. But there was no joy inside her, only a cold, firm determination to see it through. Yes, she has notes, Kate said into the phone. Financial fraud, some dubious transactions. And, yes, he threatened her. Everything is documented. When can you come? Lisa listened, her fingers trembling around the cup. After she left Steve, Kate took her in a small apartment in the center of Portland, became her refuge. She told her friend everything, the months of control, his words that he would break her, his final blow in the restaurant. Kate turned pale, her eyes filled with tears, but she did not hug Lisa or console her. She immediately got down to business. The lawyer, a woman named Margaret Holt, arrived 2 hours later. Her gray hair was pulled back into a severe bun, and her gaze was as sharp as a blade. She sat down opposite Lisa, opened her laptop, and said, "Tell me everything, and show me what you've got." Lisa began to speak quietly but clearly. She handed over records, photographs of documents, and messages. Margaret listened, took notes, and looked through files. When she heard Steve whisper, "Now I don't need you anymore," her eyebrows rose. "This is not just divorce material," she said finally. "This is a criminal case. Fraud, tax evasion, possible blackmail. If we take this to the authorities, he'll go to jail. I want him to pay," Lisa said, her voice firm, "for everything." Margaret nodded. "Then get ready. It will be fast." The following days passed in feverish preparation. Margaret worked with the police and the tax office, handing over evidence. Lisa stayed with Kate without leaving the apartment. She was afraid that Steve would find her, but he didn't look. He thought she was broken, that she had gone nowhere, just like he wanted. He was wrong. A week later, Kate burst into the living room, her eyes sparkling. "Liz, he filed for divorce," she said, throwing the papers on the table. "This morning." His lawyer brought the documents. Lisa took the papers, her hands trembling. He really threw it away officially, signed and stamped. But she didn't have time to feel the pain. Kate grabbed her hand. "That's not all," she said. "Margaret just called. He is arrested. Right now." Lisa froze. "What?" "The police went to his house," Kate said. "Fraud, concealment of income, everything you collected. They found more than we thought. He's stuck." Lisa stood up, her heart pounding. She couldn't believe it. It was too fast, too real. But she knew she needed to see it with her own eyes. "Take me there," she said. "Please." Kate nodded, grabbed the keys, and they drove off. The house on Greenwood Lane was 15 minutes away, but the drive seemed an eternity. When they arrived, Lisa saw flashing lights. 2 police cars were parked at the porch, another at the garage. Neighbors looked out of their windows and whispered behind the fences. Lisa got out of the car, her legs were shaking, but she forced herself to walk closer. The door of the house was open. She heard voices sharp, commanding. And then I saw him. Steve stood on the porch, his hands cuffed behind his back. 2 policemen held him by the elbows. The third read his rights. "You have the right to remain silent." His suit was wrinkled, his face was pale, but his eyes burned with rage. He didn't notice her at first. He looked at the police, muttering something through his teeth. Lisa stood at the fence, her fingers squeezing the cold metal. Kate came up behind her and put her hand on her shoulder. "You did it, Liz," she whispered. Steve turned his head, and their eyes met. His eyes widened, just for a moment, but enough for her to see the shock. He didn't expect her here, didn't expect this. He thought that she had disappeared, that he had won. Lisa looked at him. Her face was motionless, but a storm was raging inside. He took everything from her: freedom, will, life, made her dependent, broke her. And now he was falling, and she was the one who pushed him into the abyss. "You," he began, but the policeman pushed him towards the car. "Get in the car, Wilson," the officer said. "Let's sort it out at the station." Steve stumbled, his gaze still glued to her. Lisa didn't look away. She didn't smile, didn't cry, she just watched as he was taken away. The handcuffs gleamed on his wrists, his power crumbling with every step. He thought he had hidden his machinations: offshore companies, fake contracts, dirty deals. He thought he hid her broken spirit, but she wrote everything down. She had collected every piece of his lie, every whisper of his plans, and now this was the end of him. The police car slammed its door, and the engine began to purr. Steve looked at her through the window, his face contorted a mixture of anger, disbelief, defeat. Lisa didn't move until the car drove away, leaving behind only silence and the smell of gasoline. Kate squeezed her shoulder tighter. "It's over," she said. "You are free." Lisa nodded, her gaze still focused on the empty road. Free. The word sounded strange, almost alien after months of captivity. She didn't feel joy, not right away. Only relief, heavy as a stone that had finally fallen from her chest. He was handcuffed. For fraud. For concealing income. For everything he thought he hid. And she watched as he was taken away, not as a victim, but as one who had survived. She turned to Kate, her voice quiet but firm. "Let's go home." Kate smiled, and they walked to the car. The house on Greenwood Lane was left behind, empty as its promises, as empty as its power. Lisa sat down in the passenger seat, closed her eyes, and took a deep breath for the first time in a long time. That was the end. It's the end. And him too. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think, click to the next one.